in Scotland, and they had left this Scottish tablet on the bed. And if the reviews were anything to go by, this American couple really didn't get it. They wrote in their review, "Location and view were superb, very clean, and had everything we needed. You've got to do something with that brown tablet bar of soap you put on our beds." Not only was it gritty and left an oily residue, but disintegrated before the shower was done. I've had much better exfoliating bar scrubs. Sometimes people just don't get it. And there were many people who didn't get Jesus. But we have a gospel here that is all about knowing Jesus. Someone once said, if our greatest need as humankind had been information, God would have sent us an educator. If our greatest need had been technology, God would have sent us a scientist. If our greatest need had been money, God would have sent us an economist. If our greatest need had been pleasure, God would have sent us an entertainer. But our greatest need was forgiveness. So God sent us a Saviour. It seems to me that this gospel gives us the greatest opportunity of knowing Jesus. That is, not simply to be head knowledge, but heart knowledge too. And not that we only receive, but that we give as well. And as we'll see, we need to put in everything. We began this series in the gospel looking at the first 4 chapters. And that was, if you like, a preparation phase for Jesus preparing people for his message, preparing what was to come. And we now have leapt to the other end of the gospel in chapter 12, and we leap into the passion section of his ministry. We'll come back to those intervening times in between. But it's important to note that in a gospel of 16 chapters, 6 of these chapters are given over to just 5 days leading up to and including the crucifixion. The balance that the writer of the gospel gives us is that on these 5 days, this is the heart of the story, the good news that we are intended to pick up. The writer wants us to focus on and note the emphasis of what Jesus came to do and accomplish on earth, but also the motivation. This world really needs a Saviour. He's saying, you and I need a Saviour, and here he is, and here's what he does. One who steps into our shoes and shows us what it means to live, really live life to the full. And that means really to die to the full, as we shall see. But the teachers of the law, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they just did not get it in the main. They didn't understand. They were in conflict with everything Jesus said and did. And they just didn't get it. But there were exceptions. And here we've read of one teacher of the law who was actually open to Jesus. He was warm towards what Jesus had to say. He was about as rare as toilet rolls in a supermarket aisle. You know, not many of these folk came along. The other Gospels also record this encounter, but not in the same way. And it's intriguing to look at how this Gospel presents that encounter. There is a teacher of the law who's presented in quite a positive light. And he asks a sensible question. He asked the question, what is the greatest commandment? Now, when he asked this greatest commandment, he didn't get just one, but 2. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the first bog-off in history. Buy one, get one free. Jesus gave him 2 commands to consider. Now, this links to our verse for the year. God's love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. God's love never fails. That's how he loves us so completely. But in this story, in this question, Jesus gives an answer of how we are to love God in a certain way. But we've been thinking about love throughout this year already as we've pondered on this verse for the year. So I think it's a time for us all to do some work to engage with it. So when Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, what does that actually mean? What does that mean? Maybe you can turn to someone near you and just give your answer, because that's what we're going to think about together. So that you actually engage with this. What does that mean? We know the phrase maybe, but what does it mean in reality? Just do that now. Turn in and discuss it. Okay. Thoughts, ideas? There's no wrong answers. What does that mean to you, to love the Lord your God with all your heart? Okay. Your life force, yeah, Sydney? Trust God in all circumstances. Okay, that's what it might look like, yeah. Jerry? Ah, interesting. Not with your head, but with your heart. Yeah? Trusting. Coming back to trusting, yeah? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Okay. If you've ever been in love, maybe there's something there to draw from that experience as to how we might love God with all our heart. In Proverbs, it says, from the heart flows the spring of life. Our heart is where life emanates. And without one's will, desire, or passions, affections, perceptions, a life of love is impossible. So it encompasses quite a lot. So Jesus saying this is one of the keys. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. Then he says, love the Lord your God with all your soul. Now, what does that mean? What is that? What does that look like? Again, turn in, have a think. Okay. Loving God with all your soul. Any other folk want to comment as to what that might mean? Your inner being, yeah. I think that's a good summation of what your soul is. Eternal. Okay. Okay, so our soul is eternal. Yeah? Good thoughts? Claire? It's interesting. Yeah. The bit of us that's intended to worship God. In Genesis, we see that God formed the man from the dust and breathed into his nostrils, and the man became a living soul, literally. So God breathes into something life, and it has a soul, but that's only humans. Nothing else has a soul. Sadly, not even our dogs, which, well, there you go. So, soul. Love the Lord your God with all your soul. Jesus is calling us to do this. Love the Lord your God with all your mind. Okay, that might be a bit easier. Think about that one, chat about that one as to what that means. Okay, any thoughts there? What does it mean to love with all your mind? Yeah. So an active decision, a conscious decision. Yeah, I'm going to go God's way. That's good. Anything else? Your thinking and your will. Yeah. As I reflect on this, we all have, you might be a planet brain, you might be a bear of very little brain. But whatever you have, if you love God with all of your mind, with all of your intelligence, with all of your faculty, that will look different for different people, but we can all still fulfill this, I think. Okay? And love the Lord your God with all your strength. What does that mean, look like? How do we interpret that? Okay. Any thoughts, answers? Yes, Peter. Give it some welly. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Helen. Yeah. So the strength and courage to stand up for our faith. And in different parts of the world, that might mean a very different thing. Yeah, very good. Sorry? Yeah. 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 So we may have a position or authority or different things. Line I've got here, the strength of a person is not simply who they are, but what they have at their disposal. We can bring all that into play. And then the second commandment that Jesus says was important, the most important, love your neighbor as yourself. Again, just can you turn in, talk and discuss what that means, what that looks like? Okay, any thoughts, any helpful insights there that we can share? What does it mean to love your neighbour? Sydney? That's interesting, yeah. When your neighbour's going through a tough time, reaching out to them and giving them, sharing what you have, yes. Yeah. That's interesting. Again, it's not just love your neighbour, is it? It's love your neighbour as yourself. If mm-hmm. Okay, so be comfortable with who God made you to be, but also be aware of others and their things that they're going through. A line I've got here that's not mine, but I really like it. Love your neighbour as yourself. It says, I'm going to love you, and it's not got nothing to do with you and everything to do with what God tells me to do. I'm going to love you because God tells me to do it, not because anything in you or that you do matters. So here we are. The most important commandment happens to be 2. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and your mind and your strength, and love your neighbour as yourself. But this comes in the context of the whole of chapter 12, and a bigger picture is on show here, because as you look through this chapter, you see it starts off with the parable of the tenants of the vineyard, those entrusted to look after the vineyard, and then they turned against the owner of the vineyard, who sent messengers until he sent his only son. And the tenants of the vineyard killed that son and heir. And so the owner of the vineyard, God, gave everything, put everything in for that vineyard. Paying taxes to Caesar comes up, a discussion. And it ends up Jesus saying, pay to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. What they paid in taxes was very small in proportion. What one should give to God is surely everything. And then we see the greatest commandment in which Jesus says to the teacher of the law, you are very close to the kingdom. You are coming to understand what I'm talking about. And then we see the story of the widow's offering, which was read to us. A lovely story where Jesus is by the offering box in the temple, watching what's going on. He sees the flamboyant, outrageous, boastful donations made by the rich and the pious. But he also notices those 2 small coins popped in by the widow. And Jesus is watching all of this, and he always is watching us. And he observes not just the actions, but the motives, and that's what he observes and comments on. As a widow, she was in the place of weakness, and she was in the place of vulnerability. She didn't have the power. She didn't have the voice. She didn't have that backup of support. And yet that didn't stop her putting in everything. If you like, she was coming to the roulette table and not putting it all on Black 24, but putting it all on Jesus and thinking, whatever happens, that's where I put everything. She was putting all her eggs in one basket and saying, that is where I know I must put my life. She displayed trust. She displayed obedience. She displayed love, all in one simple, very inexpensive operation or action. But to her, she put in everything. And Jesus says that. And so as you bring the whole of chapter 12 together, it's all about putting in everything. The Father put in everything when it came to the vineyard. He gave his only Son. When we are to love God, we are to put in everything. Love him with all our heart, all our soul, all our mind, all our strength. When we love our neighbour, it's to put in everything. Unconditional love, that we love them no matter what they do or say. And then this woman, this widow, who gave just 2 small coins, but that was all she had to live on. and so she had put in everything. And this is leading up to this is part of these 5 days leading up to the crucifixion. Jesus is on this journey, and we are taken on this journey by the gospel, realizing this is going to be all on one thing. All on one thing. God putting everything into sending his Son. And he asks us to do just the same. Put in everything. Put in everything in your love for God. Put in everything in your love for one another. Because that is what it means to know Jesus. To put it all in Jesus. To put in everything for him. And so I think it begs the question, what am I holding back? Am I holding back money in my life? This is what the rich people were doing as they gave to the temple treasury. It's perhaps the least of our problems, but are we holding back money from God and refusing to be obedient in the things of our finances? What am I holding back? Is it my heart? Sometimes when we've been hurt, we become very protective, and we can't love, we refuse to love freely and openly. And God doesn't want that. He wants us to love completely with all our heart. Put in everything, all your heart. Our soul. Maybe our soul has been crushed. Our soul has been marred and destroyed in some senses and broken. But God breathes life in, and he wants you to love him with all your soul. What am I holding back? Is it my mind? We can do that so easily through the week. We can get hooked into watching telly or going on social media or, frittering time with all sorts of things rather than focusing on God. If we spent the same amount of time reading the Bible as we do watching the telly or doing something else, wouldn't that draw us closer to him? Just that prayer and reflection on him. Also, it says when we, let's not hold back our mind. And Jesus is always saying, I'm not calling for mindless religion or anti-intellectualism. He wants us with our mind. And so whatever mind you have, use it in your worship and love for him. And are we holding back our strength? As Peter said, give it some welly. Don't be lazy. Don't be lethargic. Don't think, I can just go at this half-hearted, because the report will come back lacks effort. Jesus is saying, love the Lord your God with all your strength. Put it all in. And then loving others. Are you holding back on that? It's hard. It's difficult. We have a way of hurting one another. But Jesus says, love others as you love yourself. It may not be easy, but that doesn't mean we can't give ourselves to it. You'll have heard of the famous missionary explorer David Livingstone. He penned what I think is a really great description of faith when he says this: we are working for a glorious future we are not destined to see. We are working for a glorious future where we are not destined to see. If we can so fulfill this command, to love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength, and your neighbor as yourself, it will lead to such results, such a great kingdom, such a great world, a transformed world. And we may not live to see that, but let's just follow it anyway. That's why we are to be motivated by God's love and into loving God. As I would say, we need to give until it hurts and then give even more to God. So think this morning on this poor widow. 2 small coins, but as Jesus said, she put in everything. And he wants us to do exactly the same.